Back in April, May and June this year, we spoke about Greater Manchester Police Constable Ernesto Ceraldi. Ceraldi was jailed at Preston Crown Court for 5.5 years in June after he admitted attempted rape of a woman on April the 1st this year. His victim was left bloodied and bruised after Ceraldi decided that she should be doing what he asked without question and tried to force the woman to perform a sex act on him. He therefore throttled her, punched her and pulled her hair out when she refused. The victim invited Ceraldi back to her home where they drank wine and engaged in consensual sexual activity before sitting on the sofa and talking together. The victim described a stage during the night when the defendant's attitude changed all of a sudden and he began to demand that she perform a sexual act on him and grabbed her hair. He pushed her against a wall, causing a picture to fall and smash, and put his hand around her throat with enough pressure that she nearly stopped breathing. Ceraldi then repeatedly punched her and there was a struggle before she ran to the back door and escaped. Ceraldi, who was said to have been completely naked, then chased after her, got hold of her in the street just outside of her home and continued to beat her. A neighbour saw what was happening, yelled at Ceraldi to stop, and then called the police. Well, this despicable excuse for a human being's sentence was asked to be reviewed by the Attorney General's office under the unduly lenient sentencing scheme. Lawyers representing the Attorney General's office argued at a hearing yesterday, September the 8th, that Ceraldi's sentence was simply not long enough for his crime and that it should be increased. Well, 44-year-old Ernesto's sentence has now been reviewed and the Court of Appeal have delivered their ruling. The Court of Appeal judges decided that Ceraldi's sentence was not unduly lenient and refused to increase the sentence. Lord Justice Bean said the Crown Court judge was entitled to reach the conclusion not to impose an extended sentence and to reflect Ceraldi's early guilty pleas in the overall term. Lord Justice Bean told the court a report from a prison officer indicated Ceraldi was genuinely horrified by his behaviour and that Ceraldi said he didn't want any sympathy, adding, "I have spent many years helping victims and now I have created one." I'm sure Wayne Couzens probably said something very similar when he was spoken to by Kent Police over his indecent exposure charges, hence why nothing ever came of the reports about him. In fact, I personally think that Ceraldi's sentence should have been increased because, since writing this report, I have found footage of Ceraldi in an inter-forces boxing match.
2-minute rounds between and introducing the person fighting out of the red corner, comes you by way of the Greater Manchester Police, Ernesto Ceraldi. And this is the actors of wars, Andy Hackett.
Now, that might not seem like a reason to lock him up for longer, but he had clearly trained to fight in the match, and for a man who had trained to fight, taking his hands and putting them on a woman, I'm under no surprise that blood splatters were found on the walls of her home and that her hair was pulled out and found on the floor. I think anyone who is trained to fight, who uses those skills outside of the right environment, should have that factor taken into account when being sentenced too, which it would seem that this cretin certainly did not. Oh, and by the way, Ceraldi lost that boxing match.